Scott Keeter is the Director of Survey Research at the Pew Research Center. We will talk about the post-debate polls. We'll talk about debates in general. Scott, first thing to talk about is we've seen in the last couple of Pew Research Center presidential polls, we saw President Obama with a substantial national lead. I think it got as high as 8 or potentially even 10. You tell me if I'm wrong. To now looking at Mitt Romney +4. Is it really believable that we have actually seen a 12-point swing between President Obama leading and Mitt Romney, or is something else at play here?
It is quite a swing. I don't think in my history of doing presidential polls I've ever seen anything quite as sizable as this. We've done our polling using the same method all year long. And, you get what you get when you do it, and then you ask the question, what underlies this? I think that in the case of the comparison that you're citing, the mid-September poll that we did that showed Obama with an 8-point lead on likely voters, that we may have caught Obama and the campaign at really the most positive time for him. It was, in fact, shortly before the 47% tape came out, but it was reflecting the strong bump that he had gotten out of the convention, a bump that a lot of other polling organizations showed, and it was a particularly good time for him. The narrative in the media was that Romney can't do anything right, and he's got to do something to turn his campaign around. By comparison, I think that the poll that we conducted over the weekend caught the electorate at the moment of the greatest bounce for Mitt Romney. Since our poll came out on Monday showing Romney with a small edge among likely voters, we have seen a number of other polls that also show significant movement. Those polls may not have shown as much movement from their previous poll to this one, but all of the polls are beginning to converge on a basically break-even race.
So let's talk about that a little bit, and just to dig into that. Some of the emails I got, and I would love for you to address these directly, are, hey, you're having Scott Keeter on, that's great. To ask him, how are they really adjusting for having the Romney +4 poll so heavily made up of older voters, which tend to go more for Romney, as well as, and again, correct me if I'm wrong here, showing President Obama as only having 50% support from women, which seems very, very low. How do you adjust for those things?
Well, the basic methodology of the poll is that you conduct the survey among the general public to start with. We take anyone who's 18 years of age or older. We then weight the data so that the demographic characteristics of the sample that we get on the general public match the census statistics. So we get the appropriate number of older people, younger people, men, women, African Americans, Latinos, and the like. And so the sample that we start with is a perfectly good mirror of the population and doesn't look any different from the polling that we did this summer that was so favorable to Obama. But there's where things change. When you go to registered voters, we're seeing a significantly more Republican-friendly sample, if you will. We've seen these kinds of swings in party affiliation. We got a lot of very angry emails and calls in late July when we put out a poll that showed Obama up by 10. Those calls were coming from people on the right saying that you're cooking the books, you're pulling extra Democrats into your sample. But we're not getting as much of that from the left this time, but we are getting those kinds of skeptical questions. But one of the things that stood out to me in the poll, given that we're talking here about likely voters, is how much more enthusiastic Republicans are in this poll compared with a month ago.
Well, let's talk about that. I mean, when I asked myself, okay, we're less than a month from this election, can this many people really not understand that Barack Obama and Mitt Romney represent vastly different ideals broadly? Can they really be just saying, you know what, I was going to vote for Obama, but based on a lukewarm debate performance, I'm now going to vote for a candidate who is completely different in so many ways? Is it possible what we're seeing is that as people become more likely to vote as we close in on the election and enthusiasm changes based on the weighting that polling agencies do for how likely you are to vote, that's really what we're seeing a shift in.
I think I definitely think that is a part of it, that if you tell me in our series of questions that you're giving a lot of thought to the campaign, you're following news about the campaign, that you're absolutely certain that you're going to vote, you give yourself a 10 on a 0 to 10 scale about turning out, then you're more likely to make it into the final sample. If Democrats were feeling somewhat down about the president's performance the other night, and they're not as likely to say that they're paying a lot of attention to the campaign right now because it's not all that pleasant for them, then fewer of them are going to make it through the screen. And what we stress to people is these are factors that can change again between now and Election Day.
Well, let's talk about that. If we step back from the day-to-day, how often does it happen historically, how often has it happened, that a different candidate ended up winning the election than the one that was in the average of all polls ahead before the debates started? In other words, how often do the debates change who ends up winning?
It's very unusual. It's very unusual. I would say the one example you could point to would be Reagan. There wasn't as much polling in 1980 as there is now, but Jimmy Carter had generally led in polls, not all of the polls, but many of the polls up until the debate, which of course was very late, leaving very little time for Carter to recover from not really a bad debate performance, but in many respects something maybe analogous to what we saw the other night, which is that Reagan was able to cross a threshold of acceptability with a lot of people who had very negative or at least skeptical views of him. And I think Romney, was able to achieve that. We can see that in the internals in our poll. We had a significant spike upwards in the percentage of people who said that Romney relates well to ordinary people, who found him willing to work with people on the other side. These are all things that he didn't have before the debate that he was able to pick up as a result of how he handled himself.
Last thing to touch on quickly here, when we forget about the national polling for a second and look at those few key swing states that really are going to kind of build each candidate's potential path to victory, has anything really changed drastically in terms of the scenarios that get one candidate to victory or another, given, bearing in mind the importance of Ohio to Republican candidates and all of those things we now know?
I've been following, just like you have, the swing state polling that's come out. There was quite a crop today, in fact, giving us a little bit more insight. And I think the bottom line from those is that they reflect a bounce as well, but it is a more modest one. And I think that's understandable because people in the swing states, and I live in one, I live in Virginia, have been bombarded by campaigning for months, much more so than people in the rest of the country. And as a result of that, I think attitudes are more firmly set in the swing states than they were elsewhere, where people may be more casual about the election, knowing that their vote is probably not going to make a difference one way or the other.
Interesting. All right, so we're going to keep watching those. We will see what happens after the VP debate and 2 more presidential debates. Scott Keeter is Director of Survey Research at the Pew Research Center. Thanks as always, Scott.
Thank you, David.